not even going to ask, but that's a close-up of. Forehead or thumb? Desk. No, it was thumb. Hello. We're trying to work out what that was a close-up of then.
No, I don't know why I do this, but I probably read something somewhere. I always, just on the desk, just in case that, MI5 or Russian security are watching. It's complete bollocks, but I always feel safer anyway. I don't know.
Just feel like Boris and Sattler going, what's that Nallon doing now?
Well, no. Well, there's thing about computers, which I know very little about, but I've got a website, and there's a man that looks after it, and that people have all weird sort of access to your computer and sort of can sort of live there. You know what I mean, and hide things in it, and I don't really understand it. So I'm not paranoid, but I just out of something just popped up. I don't know what that is. Let it go. Oh, you're disappeared. Oh, no, you're back again. Let me just press a button so you're both bigger. Right. Okay. So, and the sun's coming in, so I may have to wear a hat.
I will join me, Steve. Join me.
Actually, if I come closer, I can just about. Let me just make sure that this microphone's in the right place, and then
no worries.
Chat. So, hello.
Look like you're at a press conference with the two microphones.
Let's get some sort of. You got your intro ready?
I have my intro ready. Are we ready to go? Beautiful. Ladies and gents, we have a very special guest for you today. When you think of Britain in the 80s, you think of two things. Margaret Thatcher and ITV's comedy show Spitting Image. Well, maybe not, but it works for this intro, right? Today's guest is a stand-up comic, an author, a voice actor, a presenter, and an all-around legend. Ladies and gents, these are the Chronicles of Steve Nallon.
Yeah.
Hello.
Did I pronounce your surname right there? I meant to check before we went.
I don't really mind.
It's Nallon.
Is it Nallon? Damn it.
When I was on the clubs back in the 1970s, because I've been around a long time, nobody ever pronounced my name correctly. And I said, look, it's not Nallon, but that's fine. I don't mind. It's Nallon. It's like an Allen. So you say Allen with an N in the front. And the guy kept practicing and practicing, didn't want to get it wrong. And actually he introduced me and said, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the club tonight. And please welcome onto stage, Steve Valium. And I was welcome to Steve Valium, which I should have kept. You know what I mean? Should have kept.
At least I didn't get it that wrong.
So no, it's an Irish name. I think my family probably. I've got family that came over from Liverpool, from Ireland, probably in the probably during the famine, we think. And my theory is that there are very, very few Nallons in the world. There's only about 30 or 40. And my theory is that when they arrived at the Liverpool docks, they didn't know how to spell. They were probably illiterate. And I have a feeling that they were probably originally called Nolan or something, and it got put as a Nallon because it's a name that has no history in Ireland, oddly enough, but that's where we came from, County Mayo. So I'm sort of semi-related to the Nolan sisters, which is a really nice thought, isn't it? So we are. So I don't really know what the word means, but so anyway, that's the history of it. And I'm the only one in the world. I don't mean that, in a big-headed way. It's technically true. I am the only Steve Nallon in the world. So, and I'm friendly with all the American ones as well. I've been on Facebook and found them all. So anyway, you didn't need to know that, but
no, it's
Nallon. It's Nallon. Oh, at school. I went to it was a grammar school because I passed my 11 plus and stuff. It was a Jesuit school in Leeds, and it was very old fashioned. We had to call everybody master and stand up when the teachers came in. It was quite old fashioned, really. And we had a very, very sweet man who was called Mr. Morin, who was our French teacher. and he made us conjugate something like that. When you go through all the vowels, irregular French vowels, and so French verbs rather. And we were outside this and we went n'allons pas, nous n'allons pas, and everybody laughed because they heard the word n'allons pas, and that was my nickname at school, was n'allons pas, which I think means we don't go or something. So I could have had a lot worse, I think.
There's worse nicknames than we don't go.
There's a lovely lad called Chris Bromwich, and I kept in contact with, and he was known as Cheesy because of bromage. So it was that sort of school. Maybe it was the way northern lads pronounced, this sort, didn't say bromage, bromage. Chris Bromwich. That's how came about. There we are.
I just have a feeling that the Irish that's just how they pronounce Nolan in their Irish accent, and it came out as Nallon.
Yeah, just no, you're doubtless correct in that, I think. Oh, yes, indeed. I played one of the great things. I had a trouser part, because most of the time I've been on stage, I've been in a bloody dress, but I got what is known as a trouser part in the business, playing an Irish journalist. And one of the best things I ever did. I didn't get paid much, but and they thought I was Irish. The audience came and thought I was Irish. I was completely thrilled by that. And because I sort of look Irish, I could pass myself off as Irish. So anyway, you don't need. We haven't really begun, really. Really.
This is
asked me a question. All you said is, did I get the name right? And right, but who cares?
But we love this.
10 minutes there, love. That's 10 minutes.
Yes, spot on. We're off to a flyer. But no, in all seriousness though, Steve, how has the last year and a half been for you?
Well, it's been strange. Where I am now is I live in North London, and I made a decision actually before the pandemic came along to take a little bit of back seat from performing live and acting and stuff. And so next door, I had built, because I'm not a builder, but I had built a sound studio. So my intention has been to actually do audiobooks and stuff like that. So, but oddly enough, a load of other things happened, but I've now gone into sort of business with somebody. I'm going to do the recording, and he's going to do all the post-production. The idea is to do out of copyright, public domain books that are short, but for me to play all the characters, find as many characters in the books, and then do voices for all of them.
Amazing.
That's an awesome idea.
I can do, and so that's what I've been doing at the moment is preparing those. So hopefully going to start recording them.
So when you were during the whole lockdown and the whole pandemic, because obviously it's ended in England now, isn't it? Because you've all had your Freedom Day and stuff. I'm in Wales, so you've all had your freedom now. So obviously the pandemic's over. The series finale was back on Monday. But did you just decide to teach yourself anything new or learn languages or anything while you were locked away?
No, I've been scribbling. Actually,
okay.
I've been scribbling, and so and I've written several books, and I can't really talk too much about them because it's absolutely, nothing's absolutely confirmed yet. But
that's fine.
I've hopefully we've got strong interest and stuff, and one of the things I wrote, actually, I'm giving away. It's not on the website yet, but it will be. And my little book has some time travel element within it. And I decided that one of the things I could do was to, write a 5,000 word essay, for example, 4,000 or 5,000 word essay on the history of time travel in movies and television and books. And then I could put it on the website, and then they call it clickbait. So you put your advert for your book next to the text, and that takes you to Amazon. And I also want to record the Time Machine, H.G. Wells' Time Machine. So anyway, I started doing some sort of research on the various time travel stuff. And I thought, I'm a big Doctor Who fan. Time Tunnel from the 60s, I was a big fan of. So anyway, to cut a long story short, or actually to make a short story long, my 5,000 word essay has turned into 85,000 words.
Holy shit.
And I know, and I'm having proofread at the moment. And I just loved it. I love doing the research on stuff. I think it's maybe 84,000 words, maybe 85, but anyway. Maybe it will in the future. I'll go into the future and write 2,000 more words now. So I just love that, and it's one of the things I do. And said, "You're mad," and I said, "Well, I don't. I just want to work out what other people have done in their time travel stuff, because I wanted to look at the rules of time travel and how you create a time travel story and all that sort of stuff. So I've pretty much covered everything, and I sent it off to the BFI, the British Film Institute, because I know some people there, and they read it, and of course they knew some stuff I didn't know, and they said, "You've got to watch this film, you've got to watch this movie." That I then ordered on, DVDs are so cheap now, they're tuppence each. So I started watching all these films. So anyway, that's what I've been doing. It was turned into over 80,000 words of. So anyway, you test me out. I'd love that. If what's your favorite time travel story? I probably one I've never done. But anyway,
that's amazing. Just one of those things, just like writing away, and you're just like, oh, I'm really.
Well, what happens is, I read a couple of books, and the books were good, but what they did was they went film by film by film by film by film, beginning in 1938 or whatever it was. But I wanted to do something different. I wanted to do it thematically. So I wanted to look at the history of portals, what portals have been used in time travel. And then I wanted to look at the actual time machine, because in a way, I think when it's a machine, it defines it as science fiction. I think that's the thing for me, that my story isn't really science fiction because there's not a machine, but that doesn't matter. It's still got time travel in it. But it's when it's a machine, and that was the revolutionary thing about H.G. Wells's book. It was actually a machine that did it. There'd been a time travel story before then, with a sort of magical clock, but that was the thing that made H.G. Wells unique. So I sort of looked at that. What else did I look at? How to create a time being, because in a way, when you're creating your time travel character, you've got to put flaws in. You've got to create it in such a way that there is going to be a dramatic, purpose to it, and also the codes of time. What's interesting about, for example, there's a series called Travelers, and there's obviously Star Trek has got the codes and stuff. And it seemed to me the whole point of those things is you create the codes in order to break the rules. And that is how you create your story. So you never stick to your rules. If you watch Travelers, every single one of those codes are broken. And that is the point they're creating. I think, this is what they did. They created the codes in order for each episode or several episodes to have dramatic ways of breaking them. And so I think that's interesting. So I wrote about that, and I've got it over there somewhere. Hang on a second, I'll show you, because I forgot some of the titles, but well, there it is. Look, there it is.
Wow.
Anyway, I'm going to give this away. I mean, I'm not going to sell it. I spoke to the agent about it, and he said we should turn it into a book. And I said, well, its purpose really is to actually sell my own book, or be a clickbait. So I'll tell you what I've got. I've got machines and time windows. They're interesting. When you have a time, window, and do you remember? You probably don't remember it, but you might have seen it. Time Tunnel, and they always had in Time Tunnel. They had a time window which allowed them to see what the time travelers were doing. And so I talk about the time window, which I think was interesting. What else have I got? Oh, the science of time travel. That's really interesting. And I didn't really realize until I started all this bollocks that people were that science. There's a man called Everett, right? And he genuinely, and this is from about 1905, whatever it is, I can't remember the details of it, but he gave this very long, very serious scientific lecture where he basically created the possibility of multiverses. So when people talk about multiverses, it's actually based on Everett, who basically said, look, every time something happens, there's an alternative to that happening. And we normally assume that the alternate didn't happen, and we just have the thing that did happen. Mm-hmm. He said, no, it's possible that they all happen. And most people think that's nonsense, but that's where the origin or the idea of multiverses came from. It came from Everett. And there's a series, I think, I forget what it's called now. It's a Spanish series. It's on Netflix, and it's playing with multiverses. And one of the characters is called, I think, Everest, which is near enough. So what else have I got here? Dreams, foretellings, and memory. Because I don't know if anybody has ever said this before, but it seems to me interesting that the people say, you can't time travel. We time travel every night in our dreams. We all go back in time in our dreams. Not only that, you suddenly get teachers or friends from school or people who are dead suddenly in the present. So they're time traveling to us. And, in the Bible, you get endless people dreaming of the future. So they're sort of time traveling. So anyway, I decided to write all this nonsense. Have
you got hurtling around the sun at great speed?
Well, there's the speed thing is really interesting. It's called time dilation, and but I'll bore you silly now because there's the Einstein's relativity was in two parts. There was a specialized special relativity, and then he did it later with something I think is called the general relativity. And in the first one, he basically argued that you could have something called time dilation, which basically means if you've got somebody going around the Earth very, very quickly and their twin brother on Earth, the person going around the Earth very, very quickly will come back younger than the twin brother.
What?
Yeah. They will come, and this was done with a man called Scott, because he had an astronaut who went around the world on the space station for a year. And essentially his clock came back slower than his brother's. He was actually younger than his brother. Listen, we're talking milliseconds for here. We are talking 0.000.
Okay.
Tiny seconds. But in principle, time is dependent on gravity, but it's also dependent on speed. So the faster he went, the slower he experienced time. And of course, what happens is you get creative writers in fiction that read about this in 1900, whatever it was, and then create an entire fictional thing from it. The same happened with the term fourth dimension, which is to do with, it's mentioned in the Time Machine is the fourth dimension. And then people read about this and thought, oh, that's a way of getting aliens. They came from the fourth dimension. But anyway, so there's all that. What else have I got? I could talk about this for hours and hours and bored everybody's too. I know what I thought this was interesting. This is like a PhD, but I've got here time tales and national psyches. So there's a great. I watched these two together. There's a German thing called Dark on Netflix, which is absolutely brilliant. But it's very, very German. It's set in a wood, and it's like the grim stories, and there's no laughs in it whatsoever. And it's all about the past coming into the present and how it haunts the present, and it's brilliant, but it's so German. And then there's Travelers, which is all about Bonnie and Clyde and keeping America as it was and protecting American liberal values. And it occurred to me that Dark could never have been made in America, and that Travelers could never have been made in Germany. Travelers could have been made in Germany had it been directed by David Lynch. You know what I mean? It needed that sort of mind to do it. But it's so American the way the whole point of the series is to protect American history and guard our civil liberties. And whereas the German one is really about the horrors of the past still impinging on the present. And both of them play with the very similar structures that each of them have this trick, which is where you bury a time machine in 1948 and somebody digs it up in 1982, so that time travel can happen. And that, of course, is there in Back to the Future. So what I was doing was finding all these tropes that are constantly repeated in time travel stories, and both of them use that thing where a time machine is buried, for centuries, and then they send the coordinates, and then the people dig it up, and then they find it, and that allows them to do the time travel, as happened with the DeLorean. So I've got a whole section about tropes and how the same things keep coming up. And Travelers, they nicked, and they're very open about this. Do you remember the way in which Doc Brown is able to communicate with Marty in, I think, the end of the second Back to the Future film? He does it by a Western Union. He sends a telegram, or he arranged for a letter to be delivered sort of 100 years later.
Yeah.
That's borrowed in Travelers. So you get this thing. So I thought, well, if I'm going to write a time travel tale, I better learn how it's done. And then I get into causal loops and time loops and stuff like that, and people who go into the past to become their own father or grandfather, and the grandfather paradox. The famous grandfather paradox is, what would happen if you went back into the past and killed your grandfather? The big question is, why would you want to do such a thing in the first place? Why would you want to go into the past and kill your grandfather? You should have therapy, and that separates the sort of the sort of psychological interest in time travel to the billiard ball ones, where the billiard ball one is simply, which billiard ball hits whichever billiard ball, and so on and so forth. So anyway, it just. I don't know why we're talking about this, but you did ask.
Well, I did.
Well, yeah,
I did, Steve, and I find it absolutely. I was just fascinated, because you've gone to so much detail. I was just sat here going, oh my god, my head. There's
a bit of that. I mean, I did say to a friend of mine, I said, I'm tackling Hegel. He said, you're doing what? I said, well, I found these articles by Hegel about time travel. Hegel was a mid-19th century German Austrian philosopher, and I said, yeah, he does it all in a sort of metaphysical way, and I tried to read his stuff, which is impenetrable, but it's sort of interesting. It's because there was something, I wish I could find it now, but I can't remember. There's a special word which has been invented. Oh, here we are, chronesthesia, 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 and basically that is time travel in the mind. We used to call it wishful thinking, or looking ahead, but essentially it's the way in which, and it's used by sports gurus, and they sort of teach. We've got the Olympics coming up, and they teach the person to see the javelin being thrown, or to see themselves jumping over the hurdle in the future.
I see, yeah.
And there's a wonderful time travel film called Somewhere in Time with Christopher Reeve. It's a beautiful little film, and essentially it's in the mind. There's no machine, there's no portal. He just thinks himself into the past. It's a wonderful romantic film. So you get these wonderful romances like Somewhere in Time. And there's another one called The Lake House, which isn't as bad as it sounds. Because
I know of that.
You know that it's a really interesting film,
Confuse the hell out of me. No?
That's Sandra Bullock and what's the other guy? Keanu Reeves. And it's not a great film, but it's a really interesting one.
I fell asleep.
And the most interesting one I found, which I really recommend if you've never seen it, is one called Timescape, which is Jeff Daniels. And what's interesting about that is it's got time travelers from the future coming to watch disasters. And they live in a perfect world. So what they do is they arrive in certain places like the sinking of the Titanic or some volcano eruption, or I think it's a meteorite hitting an American town. And they simply watch the disaster and then bugger off. But what it does is raise the whole issue of what are we doing when we watch a disaster film? You know, we're in the safety of our seat at home or in the cinema, and we're voyeurs. We're voyeurs of disasters, and there is that side, you know, the safety of our cinema seat when we're watching Titanic or Towering Inferno or whatever that is, and it's dealing with the fact that yeah, they are voyeurs, but sort of we are too when we're watching these movies to some degree. So what I really like about time travel films and the whole Doctor Who stuff and all that sort of stuff is the time travel is less interesting to me than the issues that it brings up. And going back to being a kid in the 1970s, there's a brilliant Doctor Who, Tom Baker. It's called The Genesis of the Daleks. And Doctor Who goes back to the time when he has the opportunity. It's there in his hands, physically in his hands. He's got two wires. And if he brings them together, he will destroy the Daleks. So they'll never exist. And he asked himself the philosophical question, should I do that? Should I allow... and he argues, it's a fascinating piece of philosophy. And it also goes back to that sort of first year question that philosophers are asked when they do a philosophy course. If you had the opportunity, would you go back and kill Hitler as a baby? If Hitler is a baby in your arms, 2 days old, would you kill the baby to stop Hitler being, doing what he does? And it's an impossible question because you're killing somebody that hasn't done anything. You're killing an innocent, and yet you could be saving millions of lives. Or the alternate history could be even worse than Hitler. It's hard to imagine, but by saving Hitler, you could actually unleash something far, far worse. And there's loads of stories like that do really, really quite interesting stuff with that sort of essential moral question. So it's those are the things that I always found really interesting in the time travel stuff that I used to watch as a kid, and then you get the Terminator, which I think is. I watched the Terminator films recently. I just thought I'd forgotten how good they were.
Yeah.
And how consistent. I mean, obviously they are, and there is a perfect example of time rules, because. I can't remember the name of the thing, but when they send back the guy, I forget what he's called now, but when they send him back, he has to travel naked.
Kyle Reese. Because
the physical clothes don't travel in time, so he has to be sent back naked, which is fine for Arnie because, he's a machine. But for the human being, he ends up naked, and then you've got to find a way of getting clothes, and so he's suddenly vulnerable. So that's what I mean by designing your time travel. And the same happens in the time traveler's wife. It's a genetic thing, and in the time traveler's wife, the time traveler travels naked and has no control over it. So he just jumps in time, and wherever he lands, he's got to find some clothes. So there immediately you've got a dramatic scene where he's got to find some clothes. And that's what I mean by designing your time travel story. The best, in my opinion, is still Back to the Future 1. I think it's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, you can't fault it.
You can't fault it. You absolutely can't fault it. What you could fault was the original title, which was The Spaceman from Pluto.
Yeah, that's a pretty dreadful title. Yeah.
That wouldn't have worked so much. The head of Universal didn't get the concept of Back to the... You can't go back to the future. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. You can't go back to the future. Everybody thought it was a brilliant title, which it is. But he said, no, call it The Spaceman from Pluto. Anyway, so history... What happened was, which a friend of mine told me this, Spielberg got the memo, it's The Spaceman from Pluto. So Spielberg wrote to the head of Universal and said, thanks for giving us all a great laugh with this title. You really keep them coming. Just keep these ridiculously stupid titles coming. And that's how it was a serious thing, but that's how they got away with not having it called The Spaceman. And the other thing, about 42 studios turned down Back to the Future, even though they recognized it was a good script, because time travel movies don't make money.
I've heard that before. Yeah,
not until Terminator, and which is a low budget film anyway, but not until Terminator and not until Back to the Future. They didn't really make that much money. Not big box. They just didn't do it. But listen, Back to the Future is, and there's things I didn't notice in Back to the Future until I became a nerd and went online. I hadn't realized little jokes in it, like I think it's taught the two pines. Do you know this thing? The two pines, the shopping mall.
Yeah,
where they do the car in 1985 is called, I think, the Two Pines. But when he arrives in 1955, he crashes into one of the saplings. So when he comes back into 1985, it's called the Lonely Pines. The Lonely Pine.
Yeah,
tiny little detail. And I haven't noticed it, and I've seen the film dozens of times. And I just love those wonderful things that because I've worked in television, I've worked a couple of times in films, and people want to input what they do, whether they are production manager or whatever. They want costume design. They want to input what they do into the story and put little jokes in. And that was their little joke, was the Lonely Pine. I can't remember what it's called now, but it was the Two Pines. And you look online. It's online. Well, that's two questions you've asked me.
I was going to say, should we actually ask some questions?
No. That's the way. It's sort of, I've got the thing here, and the problem is, when it's in your head, as it is on mine, then that's when it's sort of all coming out. It's not even released yet. I mean, I'm having it spell checked at the moment and stuff. So, let's see what else have we got here. I could go on. Time Guardians. I like Time Guardians. Those people who are sent to look after time and protect it. There's a whole history of stuff there. So as I said, when I was researching this, I thought it would be, 4,000 or 5,000 words maximum, and I didn't realise it was such a big subject.
It's just fascinating.
Neither did I. To be fair, I'm impressed
because they think this is all about time travel.
Welcome to the Time Travel Podcast. So,
anyway, go on.
The way I'm going to word this now is just ridiculous considering what we've just been talking about. So take us back, sir. What was the original plan for young Master Nallon growing up? Was it always performance?
Yep, absolutely yes, because I had no other... I was very lucky in a way, because I knew what I wanted to do when I was 4 or 5, which was perform. So I'm talking about the 60s here, and I had this long scarf, and I could wrap it around my head. It could become a turban. I could use it as a shawl, and I would go behind the settee and I would create characters and create stories. And it was mainly characters, less than stories. And I had a reasonable singing voice. I'm not a great singer, but I had a reasonable voice. I always wanted to sing. And I was the kid at school who always got the solo to do, where everybody else went in groups and I got the solo. So I always wanted to be a performer. What I didn't realize was that you could be a performer. I mean, that's the big thing. And I come from, I've talked about this recently, but I live in a very nice middle-class part of North London. So I can't pretend that I'm anything else other than, nice middle-class lad in, but when I was a kid, I had consumption. I lived in a back-to-back house, cobble streets, tin bath. I genuinely remember the tin bath. We had no hot and cold water. We had cold water. We didn't have hot water. And I do remember the kettle coming into the bath. That's how we had a bath and stuff. And the bath was in the scullery, under the kitchen works off. You take the thing out, and then the tin bath would be underneath there. And I do remember that. You're looking aghast that this could exist, but it really was back in the mid 60s, before there was what was known as the conversion alterations, where the council then came in and put a dormer in in an attic room and put in hot and cold water and baths and things. But we did not have a bath, no. We moved. I mean, that wasn't the case. And then anyway, but the point being, I didn't know a way in which I could become a performer, because I had no contact with actors or anything like that. And I spoke to actors, and they'd bemused, because they said, well, my father was an actor, or my mother was an actress. That's why I became an actor. They don't get how somebody who didn't have a parent who was an actor could become an actor or a performer. They just don't get it. And I said, well, I'm peculiar. That's the way I am. I don't know why. There are people who look at mountains and say, I want to climb that. And I look at a mountain and say, I wouldn't want to climb that. It looks stupid. But, that's the great thing about mountain climbers. They look at a mountain and they say, I'm going to climb that. Good for them, I say. It's not going to be me. I'm going to dress up and put on funny voices. So anyway, my teens, the only live entertainment I knew was the clubs, the working men's clubs. So that's what I became. I became a club act. I was also going to the theatre. I went to a nice grammar school and stuff, and was learning about the theatre a little bit. And I was brought up in Leeds, so I went to Leeds Grand and saw stuff, and I went to Leeds Playhouse and saw more, the Shakespeare stuff. Didn't understand any of it, but I went. But in my early days of performing was the clubs, the northern clubs, and I got booed off, paid off. Booed off was tough. I did do one club though, and I got booed off after a very short time. I was meant to do 20 minutes, and I think I did. I didn't do long, but So the guy said to me, he said, "Well done." It was in the northeast. He said, "Well done, lad." I said, "I got booed off." He said, "Aye." He said, "Last comment we had from Yorkshire lasted 2 minutes." And sort of lasting slightly longer than 2 minutes was good. And I got, they threw things at me. I do remember that, but they weren't interested in what I was doing, and they were playing cards, and then they started throwing their cards at me, and then they started throwing coins at me. So I got that. I did. So what I had 2 20-minute acts, right? And I'd often work with somebody, but I had 2 20-minute acts. So I did this club once, and I did my first 20-minute act, and I died on my ass. It was really, really deathly. And I was summoned to the concert secretary's office, and I got paid off, which basically meant you were given half your fee and told to go home. So I said, "Look, I know it didn't go well, but my second spot is better. Please, I understand what you're doing, and I accept, I'm going to be paid off. I accept half the money, but I want to go on and prove that, what I can do, and do my second act." He said, "We don't want the fucking club cleared, lad." That was the end of that. So when people worry about, whether the Daily Telegraph has reviewed them badly in whatever they're doing in the West End, I always remember we don't want the club cleared as the ultimate in criticism.
I bet they're fucking kicking themselves now.
Well, no, and actually I think it was Newton Aycliffe, which I think was Tony Blair's constituency. I mean, it was one of those things where I used to, because it makes me sound as if I was terrible. I wasn't terrible, because what the great thing was about the clubs, you could genuinely play 2 clubs in a night, and you could do a storm in one and die on your arse in the other, and then you'd learn why,
Yeah.
who you followed, So I played one night, and there was a blue comedian on, and I came on after the blue comedian. He'd overextended. He'd gone on for too long. He'd used all the laughter in the audience up, basically.
Okay.
It was all very, very blue, and they loved him. Best of luck to him. I came on doing funny voices, nothing, because the mood was wrong. It just didn't. And I'd learn that, and I'd learn about the size of the room and where to, learning how to pitch it. And you'd walk into a room and you think, I'm going to die my ass tonight because of the room. You'd just pillars, for example. You'd see pillars, and you'd know you'd lost half the audience. Or you'd walk into a room and thought, this is perfect size. Everybody sat in the right place. All the time of day you went on, the time of night you went on. I say, look, I'm a special act, put me in the middle. But I can't, I've opened. I don't like closing because it's late at night, and people start, getting a bit excited about I've closed as well. So, but you just learn all those things about, how to. I did a cruise ship once. I've only ever done one cruise ship, and they didn't put me on in the theatre. They put me on in what is known as the cabaret room, which had a big dance floor. So I go in, and my heart sank, because it's great for a singer, because the singer's on stage, you've got people dancing on the dance floor, and then they sit in a sort of horseshoe round the dance floor. If you're doing comedy, you're performing to an empty dance floor. And I said, this, and I was with Roy Walker, and he said, it's the room. Steve, it's the room. And I had no choice but I said to the organisers, I cannot perform on stage. It's impossible for me to perform on stage. Let me perform in the middle of the dance area. And it was a great success because nobody walked out. I discovered this on a cruise ship. I said to the organizer after, you do 2 sets. You do a first meal and a second meal, essentially the same slot, but you do it twice. So always one goes better than the other, but inevitably. But and both went okay. And the organ was who was it? P&O. They were very happy with it because nobody left. And Roy said to me, Steve, if they don't like you, they'll go. And absolutely, he's seen rooms cleared where people, because they're there for 3 weeks. That if they don't like the act, they just piss off, and they all get up and leave. And nobody left. So I struggled a bit because I was at their level, and you're always slightly better if you're raised up. But I survived it. So I've done too many of those, though. I got booked for Birmingham Town Hall for a gig. And I said, why did you book me? He said, well, we saw you and you did really well in the room. I said, what is the shape of the room I'm working in the town hall? It's L-shaped. I said, L-shaped? He said, yeah, it's L-shaped. Or you imagine a V upside down, and you're going to be performing at the sort of apex of the V. I said, well, that means I can only look at one side, down one audience and not the other. I can't look at them all together. He said, no, you can't. That's the point. You're essentially performing to 2 different audiences. Right. I survived it, but it was, you just knew it was going to be tough. And the worst one ever is the Great Room at, I played the Great Room at Grosvenor House. Never performed there if the balcony's thin. It seats about several thousand. It's the biggest corporate room in England. If the balcony's in and you lose them, you're fucked. That's the end of your act. And I've played there a few times and lost them, and also played a few times and won them over as well. So it works both ways. But anyway, it's hit and miss, and you get upset about it when it doesn't work, and you get pleased about it when it does. But you don't let either take over your life.
Yeah.
You know, you just sort of say, look, and that's what I learned on the clubs, you know, and all the other comedians knew it, that you know, Steve, you can dine your ass and then you can do the next club and you can be the best thing they've ever seen. It's just the way it is. And that was a great lesson to learn, actually.
You wonder sometimes why architects go, I know it's a great idea for a room. We'll just split it off in a V and just fuck the middle. We'll just go down the sides. Bollocks to them.
I think the worst room I've ever played was actually, and I have no idea why they booked me for this. It was, I think it's the Victory ship that is in Portsmouth Harbour. If I'm wrong on that, forgive me, but it's the ship that's in Portsmouth Harbour, and it's very, very long. It's a long ship, and the seating arrangements is benches with front and back.
Oh.
So, and you've got the masts, the supports for the mast all along the ship. So 80% of the audience can't see you. So 50% of them can't see you because they've got their backs to you because they're sitting on benches. The rest of them can't see you because there's masts in the way, and the others can't see you because you're too far away.
Fucking hell.
What is the point?
Well, I did say that. What is, you know, and I just knew I was going to die on my ass. But what I did was, I thought this was a good idea. I thought, okay, I'll wander up and down, you know, at least try to get eye contact all along it. So I did the whole act. So I walked along the ship, as it were, trying to collect the audience by looking at them and welcoming them and saying hello to them. But it was a radio mic and it cut out when I went to the side of the ship, so they couldn't hear me. It was just one of those,
Oh my God.
one of those nights that can I talk about something else, which is that the opposite is the case as well, because sometimes you can perform an act and they just love you too much, and then you've got to dampen them down. So when I was doing Thatcher, and I did loads of corporate stuff as Thatcher, Mrs. Thatcher under Kenneth Baker created a system where essentially the colleges went independent, which basically meant that they could pay themselves what they wanted. So all these principals, it was late 80s, and all these principals basically went from, you know, £42,000 a year to £142,000 overnight because they became independent. And they said to me, this is the audience you're playing to. They are very pleased with themselves because tomorrow morning they get a pay increase of around £100,000. Well, when I went on stage dressed as Thatcher, who had essentially allowed this to happen, I got a standing ovation, you know what I mean? And every single word I said was cheered. And I thought, I've got a long act here. I've got a long script that I've specially written for them. And I've got, you know, we've got to finish before midnight. And I then had to do the opposite. Instead of trying to get them, I tried to, you know, just calm them down a bit. So I also knew they wouldn't necessarily last the distance. Students are like this. You perform to students, they are so excitable within the first 3 minutes of your act. They just laugh at everything, and then it tends to peter off. So you've just got to pace yourself a little bit when you perform to students. And when I was about, when I got to 50, and I'm 60 now, when I got to 50, I was so thrilled I was still doing the clubs, stand-up comedy clubs. And when I was 55, I did Preston University on a Friday night and survived it. So I was, you know, I thought, if I can still do Preston University on a Friday night, I'm not doing so bad. But I think then I came to the conclusion, right, I've managed to survive performing, you know, to this age. Not all performers do it. That's probably enough now. So that's why I've sort of wanted to go into the slightly quieter art of doing audiobooks next door, because it is tough, you know. It's tough doing those clubs, but I enjoyed it. You know what I mean? I'm looking back at it now, and I am looking back because I don't really do it anymore. But And they loved what I was doing, you know. I mean, they hadn't really seen, and that's what people said to me when I went back on the stand-up comedy clubs in London. Nobody had ever seen an impressionist act. They'd seen them on the television. They hadn't seen them in person, without makeup, without props, without wigs, and suddenly going from character to character to character, and there weren't that many of us. There's more now, actually, but there weren't that many of us doing that. And occasionally I did Thatcher. Goodness me, we've been chatting for a long time and I haven't done Lady Thatcher yet. And that's a terrible thing. Goodness me, why don't you ask Mr. Westwood and Mr. Stevens, why don't you ask Mrs. Thatcher, Lady Thatcher, a question? That's what the listeners want. Don't dawdle. We haven't got all night. Don't dawdle. What is your question?
Tom's a better one to ask a question to a Tory, to be fair.
Ask the question.
How did you
murmur? Take away the hand from in front of your face and articulate properly so that I can understand what you're saying.
I do apologise, Lady Thatcher, for my misdemeanour. Sorry about that.
I don't like beards, by the way. Just to let you know, I do not like beards. Never trust. True, actually. Mrs. Thatcher never trusted a man with a beard.
I don't like Tories, so
personally, but she never did. So, and that's what I used to do. I never had an act really as Thatcher. I did have an act, but it was taking questions from the audience, which I did in Edinburgh, and I then did in the corporate world a lot. And I did have an act, you know. I sort of knew what questions would come up. People ask about the Queen or Neil Kinnock or Dennis or whatever. Oh, Dennis is such a lovely husband, because when I come home from work, from the House of Commons, Dennis is always there, so ready, willing, but sadly unable. You can't have everything. So I did all that, you see. And people said, so do you have much time for what? Do you have much time for watching films and television? Oh, no, I don't really have a lot of time for television, I'm afraid. I did see a television program on the other day, which was very, very worrying, and I found rather disturbing. It was a television program with a lot of homosexuals all living together. Well, I think Rainbow should be banned. And then I do say, I love the Two Runners. Everybody loves the Two Runners, but I do love the Two Runners. You know, sometimes when I'm watching the Two Runners, I do sometimes wonder, could one runner do the job just as well? Isn't there a little bit of overmanning there? And that has always been the fault of the British economy.
Just phenomenal.
These are the gags, folks. These are the gags, folks.
Oh.
But with doing the impression of Maggie and all the others, how do you realise that you can do these things? Is it something you're like, I want to do impressions of people and practice and practice and practice, or is it just something that comes to you naturally?
Well, it's wonderful when it comes naturally. Here's a true story, actually. So I wanted to do a routine about detectives, TV detectives. So I listened to 2 hours in the car of a talking book. They called them talking books then. It was Kevin Whately and Morse and stuff. So I thought I'll do that. So I was, and I got as far as Lewis. That's about as far as I could say, because it's quite grammar. Lewis. And my Kevin, I've never been able to do the Northeast accent particularly well. So I don't know, sir. That's about as far as I got with that. Anyway, I've been practicing. And then I came home, dumped the bags down. And I do not know how, but suddenly, without thinking about it, I was doing Miss Marple, the Joan Hickson Miss Marple from the 1980s. And from nowhere came, Oh, Chief Inspector. Oh, yes, I do wonder why the sherry was poisoned, you see. And suddenly, without knowing, without practicing at all, there I was doing it. And the other impressionists, Alistair McGowan, who I've been in contact with recently anyway, and Lewis MacLeod as well, they say, oh, do you Miss Marple? Do you Miss Marple? It's their favourite. And it's sort of my favourite too, because you see, it's such a tiny little voice. And there's so little of it, you see. And to capture it, and there's so little, anybody can go, oh, Louis, oh, Louis. Anybody can do that. But to get, oh, Chief Inspector, and you've got all the attitude. And this is Alison McGowan's word, but it's true. It's not really about the rhythm, ultimately. It's not really about the pitch. It's about the attitude. And if you can capture in the voice, oh, Chief Inspector, and you know that she knows something he doesn't, just in the way she says that line. Oh, Chief Inspector, I'm so sorry. I got it right and you got it wrong. That's there in the voice. So that's what you're ultimately trying to capture. And it's very, I mean, there are technically difficult voices I've done. The most difficult really was Robin Williams when I did a show in Edinburgh years ago. And I put him on the poster in March before I could do the voice. I know he was slightly earlier than that. So, but the show opened in Edinburgh and I put it on the poster. I could do it even though I couldn't. So I had to make myself do it. The thing about Robin Williams, bless him,
confidence.
the wonderful guy is, he had no one voice. He every single voice was different, and his rhythms were completely different, and that's what made him brilliant. And so I just remember walking around the house for a week going, oh, because I heard that in the voice, and then, oh yes, indeed, slowly you put those things together, and yes, indeed, good, my Vietnam. Yes, let's talk about it, boys. Yes, thank you, boys. Yes, sir, carpe diem. Seize the day. And he's got that wonderful thing where he can be very serious and go, oh yes, no, and very, very silly. Oh, and it's all over the place. It's a brilliant rhythm, but it was bloody hard to do. And but anyway, that was the one I'm sort of most proud of in the way that I could, get that one. And nobody else was doing him at the time, so that was quite. I think now it's much more difficult. I without mentioning names and stuff, I talk to other impressionists of my generation, and we're losing it. I was lucky enough to work with Mike Yarwood, who was a big star of the 1970s. Big impressionist, wonderful guy, and he got to 50 and couldn't do it anymore. Somehow the brain just didn't allow it. You couldn't. Okay. You sort of just couldn't get them anymore, and I found that. So, I years ago when I was doing Robin Williams, it took me a while to do him, but I got there, and I tried to do Cameron, and I got close at David Cameron, but I never mastered it. I just couldn't. I couldn't make it work. David Cameron has a slight. He sounds as if to me he's recovering from a bad cold, or he's just getting over a bad cold. Because he has that slight catch in the voice, he had that slight catch at the back of the throat, and it always sounded as if he's just a rather bad cold. And that's about as good as I got. It's okay. It's better than most other people's. And then we had Brexit, and he resigned. So that was a bloody fucking waste of time.
Bastard.
That was the other thing. The bastards, eventually got Blair. And then he buggered off, and we got Gordon Brown, who I couldn't even do. But that's the thing, you hear with Blair, it was do. You hear certain vowel sounds, and you think, oh, that's the trick to it. Probably the most difficult voice to do that sounds as if you could do it relatively, not easily, but it sounds as if you could do it, is Anne Widdecombe. Probably nobody knows who Anne Widdecombe is, but she was a right-wing conservative politician. And she had the weirdest voice because she's actually got two notes. And actually to create two notes at the same time I don't really know how it happens. Oh, I went to the hospital and they put a camera down my throat and to see what was happening. And most of it was okay. But when I did Anridicum, it ate the camera. It's actually sort of, where's the fucking camera gone? And what you got with Anridicum, and you can hear it, is that there is two voices at the same time. And a low almost happening together. So I met her. I was introduced to a tiny little lady. So a journalist friend of mine introduces Anne, come and meet Steve, who does you. And I wasn't frightened. You know, I said to her, what's very unusual about you is that you have got two notes in your voice. And she said, yes, I have. And she reckoned she was fine about it. And I said, do you know who else has a voice like this that you wouldn't necessarily think has a voice like this, but they do? And she said, well, do tell me. I said, Homer Simpson from The Simpsons. And then I went into Homer Simpson. And Homer Simpson has got the same thing. He's got the same two notes. He's got a high and a low together, which is really difficult to do. She had not the clue who Homer Simpson was.
No!
What? No idea. I said, oh. So I think she was thinking the Iliad and the Odyssey, because she's a classicist. And she just looked at me completely blank when I did this. She didn't know what
Phenomenal.
I was about to do. But that is a very difficult voice to do. And that's actually the last. This is the last good voice I did. You know, Robin Williams and I did a routine from. I did what did I do? I did a routine from. So many people were dying that I was doing, or they were disappearing. So I thought I know what I'll do. I'll just do sort of classic voices of. The Harry Potter. You see, Harry Potter will never ever go out of fashion because there's a new generation. So I did a load of voices from Harry Potter. Now let me see. I can't remember. It's so long ago since I did it now. So I said Dame Maggie Smith. The wonderful, great classical British actress. But you've got to admit that Professor McGonagall voice is a very strange Scottish accent. Yes, I would agree. It's a very strange. It's a very strange Scottish accent that can only be described as Dick Van Dyke meets Braveheart. And so she's a great character because everybody knows who she is now. Yes, well, of course, in her English voice, she's what is known as vocally as a flicker. You can hear her flicking all the time. So if I teach students in vocal stuff, I get them to do this and to physicalize it. So she's she's very much a flicker. She's all flicking everything off, you see. Whereas it's not the best voice I do, but the wonderful Alan Rickman, who I had dinner with, who was a lovely, lovely man. I adored him, but I didn't know him well, but we did have dinner once. And he presses, Severus Snape presses and keeps it going in one breath. So I said, this is how you can learn the voice. You hear whether it's a flick or whether it's a Alec Guinness. As Obi-Wan Kenobi, he is a floater. His voice floats up and down and sideways. The Sand People are usually frightened. You can hear him doing it, and he gets very sing-song. And
magnificent.
And then who else? John Hurt. Well, he's much more of a stabber. He goes. So anyway, so all these voices from Star Wars and Harry Potter, because I knew that everybody would know who they were. Whereas actually, if you do somebody on television now, particularly a sports person, because of the sports channels and stuff, there are so many, the Sky Sports and stuff. So you can no longer. For an impressionist nowadays, compared to the 60s, 70s, or 80s, right? We all knew the same television programs because even if you weren't a sports person, you would have, you'd have come across the sports commentators at some stage. But now you can't say that because, so much of it is Sky or BT or whoever it is. So you can no longer be sure everybody's watching the same program. And that's why I sort of started concentrating on movie stars. Anyway.
Makes sense.
So but I don't really, I just got to the stage where, I'll tell you what it was, and Preston University is not a bad example, but I was doing other clubs and I could see the look on these people who are in their 20s, and I came on, this grey-haired man coming on, and I had to win them over, and I often did win them over, but it just became that extra bit of a struggle. Whereas if you're 26 and you go on stage and you say, right, lads, we're all here tonight, you don't have to win them over. They're already there because you're their age and so on. So I got to a stage where I had to win them over, and it just made it a little bit more hard work. So I just decided to stop.
So I thought doing comedy, getting older, you'd actually get better rather than get worse.
Well, I think you get better. There are things I won't go into details, but the things I've auditioned for, I wanted to do, and I certainly think that there are character stuff I'd like to do, but in terms of going on stage with a microphone and saying, hello, I do funny voices and let me entertain you, I think that part of my life is probably over now. And I've loved this, I've loved chatting about it with you, but and you can probably hear my enthusiasm for it. But
yeah,
if somebody said to me, oh, by the way, you've got to do 20 minutes tomorrow night, I'd be terrified and wouldn't want to do it.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, now, partly because of the lockdown, just the thing of when I was being booked for corporate stuff, I got to a stage where I said, how old are they? How old are the audience? And they said, oh, they're 25 to about 35. I said, no, I'm not going to risk it. And then I did a gig and they, and I said, what are they selling? And they said, well, Steve, they're actually selling incontinence pants. So I said, that's my audience. I can't get those. Incontinence pants I can talk about. No, and they were all, I occasionally still do what they call Rotary Club, because, the Rotary Club people are all in their 50s and 60s, so that's fine. But it would terrify me now to go and do. But also some of the clubs that I used to perform at, they closed. That even before COVID, there was some of the clubs in London were closing, or the people that were running them, legends actually. The Chuckle Club was one of the great comedy clubs. It slowly, Robin Williams himself performed at the Chuckle Club, a legendary club. It sort of came to the end of its life, and back in the 80s there were maybe 4 or 5 comedy clubs, and now there's 145, and the ones that I played at, Comedy Club, Soho Comedy Club, Chuckle Club, the Hub, and I used to get regular bookings for all these, they all closed. It all came to an end, and there was a new generation, and they didn't know who I was, or they didn't want me on the show. Because I was a special act, and they don't do special acts. So I just thought it was a good time to bring it all to an end. But maybe for a special occasion, I'd go on and do 5 minutes, but I wouldn't do any more than that.
Yeah,
that's fair enough.
And as I say, if somebody said, oh, do you do Johnson? No. Do you do Trump? No, I've not. Genuinely, I've not even tried. And God knows how you tackle Biden. I don't know how do you make, and then you get people like Hancock, and I used to feel sorry for Rory, because Rory used to talk about this, Rory Bremner. He would practice 3 months, somebody like Hancock, and then Hancock put his hand on somebody's arse, and that's the end of his career.
Yeah,
and just all that work has gone, and he never had that much of a distinct voice anyway. Obviously Boris Johnson does, and that's fine, and he's got a deeper register than me, and there's endless people doing Boris Johnson. I just thought, no, that's going to be it really. So
That's fair enough. But if the desire there not to do it, then there's no point doing it.
I think that's it. And I've got to the stage. I tell you what has changed more than anything else for me on a personal level is I'm now determined only to do what I want to do. Not to have to do those jobs that I don't want to do. I think that's the big. And I want to write. I want to write my stories. And that's really what I want to do, and record them. Turn them into audiobooks and do that. So I've written some ghost stories. So I've written them. I've always wanted. I love ghost stories. I talked about time travel, but I love not supernatural stuff. I don't really like horror, but I love ghost stories. And so I'm a big fan of M.R. James and his tradition, but others. I like comedy ghost stories as well. So anyway, I'm slightly giving away the plot here, but I have a friend of mine who comes and stays sometimes. He's a Cornish actor, and he comes and stays sometimes in where I am. And in my bathroom, I have a carry-on section of carry-on stars. So I've got Kenneth Williams, I've got Hattie Jakes, I've got Charles Hawtrey, and they're above the toilet, right? Which is where you'd put carry-on people above the toilet. And Adam, who's my friend, he says, I can't really go, I can't really use the toilet. I said, what are you talking about? You can't. Well, it's the way Hattie Jakes looks at me. I said, what do you mean it's the way she looks at me? Well, it's that picture. Her eyes follow you all around the room. Even when I go wash my hands, she's still looking at me. I said, don't. He said, no, genuinely, I really find it difficult to stand there with my willy out and her looking. So anyway, visiting Hattie became the private joke for going to the toilet. I'm going to go visit Hattie.
Phenomenal.
So anyway, I then was beginning to write some ghost stories, and then I came up with the idea of Hattie Jakes haunting the toilet, and then I thought, I'll write this, and I thought, well, I'm going to write it. So then I decided to write it as Kenneth Williams telling the story. So now I have written, I come back and I'm going to do it as Kenneth Williams. You see, so I've written this story of Hattie Jakes, who ends up haunting the downstairs toilet of these two gay bears, you see. And yes, and so it's a very long, complicated. So anyway, it is eventually explained why she's there and stuff. So, and I don't know why in the last couple of years that those ideas have come to me in the way they haven't done for the previous 30 years. I've got a load of ideas like that. So I've written that, and I've written 3 others. So I was chatting. I don't know if there's a wonderful comedian I work with called Nina Benjamin, and Nina, we became very, very good friends because we're so different. She says to me, she won't read them because they're ghost stories. She's freaked out by ghosts. So for my 50th birthday, she joined me at a film. So she said, what is it? She said, is it a ghost story? I said, no. She said, I don't do anything supernatural. I said, I want to go see True Grit. She said, True Grit, what's that? I said, well, it's a cowboy movie with men shooting each other. She said, that's me. I want to go see it. My 50th birthday was with Nina watching True Grit with men shooting each other, which she loved. But she won't watch ghost stories. She won't interested. She's terrified of them. Anyway, I was telling her about this, and she said, well, you've got to write a Thatcher ghost story, haven't you? And I thought, well, I genuinely hadn't thought of that. I genuinely hadn't thought of writing a Thatcher. It was stupid. So I got onto the phone to the agent, and I said, Nina suggested I write a Thatcher ghost story. And then he said, well, of course you've got to do it. Why didn't you think of that? The most obvious thing in the world. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. I've started it. I started it yesterday. So I've got the plot in my head and stuff. So she comes back as a ghost. Anyway, I shouldn't be talking about that because it's not even finished yet. But But that's what I'm doing, and I've got some other ghost stories. And I'm a big fan of M.R. James, who's, if you don't know him, is an Edwardian ghost writer. Very ordinary and then become weird. He always had this weirdness right at the end of his stories. I always love them. So I want to write a sort of tribute one to him. And people have read them and people have said, look, these are really good. This is what you should be doing. And why haven't you been doing it before? So that's sort of the man in Waterstones has read them. He loves them, and he said, look, this is really what you should be doing now. So they're just weird. The Hattie Jake stuff is just slightly weird, but and I've seen God knows how many films and stuff over the years, and like the time travel stuff, you sort of work out how things are constructed when you see things, when you see the same thing. So I watched Dark Travelers with time travel, Dark Travelers, and what's the other one I watched at the same time? I can't remember what it was called now. It'll come to me in a minute. That you then sort of see how they all work when you're seeing essentially the same plot being repeated.
Yeah.
And so I sort of know how stories work. And I've done the Robert McKee story course and all that sort of stuff as well. So what's the other one? Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Time, what was it called? Times. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. The American one, but anyway, I'm getting
Timescape. Is it Timescape?
Well, no, not Timescape. That's the film. It's the one that I've got it. There's Travelers, which is from the future, and then there's anyway, it's a version of time tunnel because they go back into the past. So I may have got that wrong earlier when I was talking about Travelers. I can't remember now. And that's they all merge.
Yes.
They all merge in together. When you've seen hundreds of them, and I really have seen hundreds of them.
And written 84,000 word essay.
And written in the Hegel was the most challenging. That was certainly the most challenging. Yes, I wish I could find it now. I can't remember. Anyway, no causal loops and stuff. It'll come to me. So if I said Travelers earlier, I should have said something else. It's called Time something. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. We can put it in the postscript.
Yeah, absolutely. So go on, Jamie.
I was going to say, as we went back onto Thatcher again a minute ago, we should probably talk about Spitting Image before we get out of it, really, definitely. So how did this show come about and you being part of it?
Well, this is where life becomes a bit fluky because I was in Theatre Clwyd in Rep in October 1983. Odd enough, playing Thatcher. The reason I was doing that was slightly complicated, but the son of the artistic director knew me and got me in. Anyway, so when that came to an end, I said, look, I'd love to stay, and do the next production. And they said, well, the only thing we've got is the pantomime horse. We can give you the back end of the horse in the pantomime. And I said to an actor, I've been offered the back end of the horse. And I said, why shouldn't I do it? Because it's a classic thing. He said, yes, Stephen. It was an Irish. He says, oh, yes, Stephen, you must do the back end of the horse, but you must do it on one condition. I said, what's the condition? He said, the condition is that you get top billing. And then he said to me, you do not do the back end of the horse. You are an actor. You do not. And that taught me a lesson. It's okay to turn work down. And if, and you've got to have some degree of self-respect as well. So you do not do the back end of the horse. So I said, fair enough. So I went home and read about Spitting Image. And had I stayed and done the back end of the horse, I would not have been on Spitting Image. So I write to John Lloyd, Blackadder and all that sort of stuff, not the Hancock News. I live in Birmingham. He's coming to Birmingham to discuss the design of the spitting image. I get an interview with him. The lady on reception thinks I am John Lloyd for some reason. I get shown into the building and I meet the designer who thinks I'm John Lloyd. I said, no, I'm here to see John Lloyd. Oh, there's been a mix-up. So I've got myself right into the building. You know what I mean? One of those things, I've got myself past security. I've got myself right into the building. So I'm sat there. So John Lloyd walks in and says, oh, you're the young lad, aren't you? I said, yes. He said, right, okay. So I don't think he'd anticipated me being there in that way. So anyway, he said, well, what shall we do? Because, you know, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm not going to do Thatcher as, you know, just do it. I said, ask me a question. As I said to you earlier, ask me the question and I'll answer it with Mrs. Thatcher. All right, okay. So, Mrs. Thatcher, what are you going to do about unemployment? May I point out to you, Mr. Lloyd, that yes, unemployment is rising, but what we will be creating are real jobs, not false jobs, which happened under the socialist government of the 1970s. We will be creating real jobs that will last. And he just went, I think you've got the job, basically. And then he said, which other voices do you do? He said, no, there's more than that. I said, well, people may not remember him, but well, there was a man called Roy Hattersley, who was deputy leader of the Labour Party at the time. And Roy Hattersley, they made him, and he was the one that did all this spitting on spitting image, because he had this tight list, and he was always sort of spitting. So he said, that's good. I said, well, he's from where I am. He said, who else do you do? And I said, well, I do Enoch Powell, who people will remember as the rather ultra right-wing conservative MP from the 1960s. And I said, that's right, okay. And then the most important thing was I met on the same day Roger Law. The thing about Roger is that if he likes you, you're in. If he doesn't, you're out. And he loved me because he just loved the idea of Mrs. Thatcher being done by a man. He just thought it was the funniest. And so in a way, and then I thought, have I got the job? I think I must have got the job. And then I was basically, you know, told to come to London and met all the other team and that was it really. And it was that fluke of getting a private meeting and getting in, and it was one of those things in life where everything worked for me. I've been in situations where it doesn't, and that can be tough, but where it was almost as if all the cards, all the dominoes lined up, or whatever metaphor you want, and everything fell into place for me. I met the right people in the right order. What I hadn't realized on Spitting Image was how disorganized they were.
Really?
They really weren't. And actually, when you look at the first couple of shows, they're really terrible because, we didn't really know what we were doing. And they're genuinely not very good. We really got, by 5 or 6, we knew what we were doing. But the first few shows aren't that great. But they had a laughter track on the first show. People forget this, that we had a guy, a wonderful man called Peter Harris, who directed the Muppets, but he made us do it by leaving pauses so he could put laughs in, which was terrible. It was start laughter, and it was really bad. So and then they didn't have time to edit it, put the laughter in, so then they cut it out. But on that show, we still had the pauses in. So it was a terrible. If you watch those early shows, they're pretty terrible. The talent is there. You can see the talent in the puppets and the voices and stuff. And the thing that I learned more than anything else, and it's what Peter Flock told me, Roger Law and Peter Flock being the puppet creators, really. He said, don't do an impression. Find your way of caricaturing the voice, that it matches the puppet. And John Lloyd said to me, we've got a man called Robert Ronsey, he was Archbishop of Canterbury. We all had to audition as well, for it. So I said, I think I can have a go at that. I like a go at that. So I knew what he sounded like. And so I did my Robert Roncy. And Robert Roncy spoke like many archbishops, as if he was constantly in prayer. Yeah, that's a great impression, but you can't do that with the puppet. It's so slow, it'll kill the sketch. And then he gave me the best note I've ever had as an actor. He said, okay, right, take that voice and make him 7 years old. I said, right, okay. Make him, don't make him an old man, make him 7 years old and enthusiastic. So I took this voice, which was very slow, and then I made it younger and made it quicker and sort of made him talk like this. And suddenly the Robert Roncy was still there. Oh, but, and he was 7 years old and he believed in Santa Claus.
That's amazing.
It wasn't a Santa Claus who'd feed the reindeer. And that was one of the lines that went into the show. So that was always one of my favorite voices, because it's not remotely accurate, but it's got a truth in it. And it makes, and he became a hugely popular character on Spitting Image because the voice worked and the puppet did. And he was funny. I made him funny. That's what the great gift of Mike Yarwood was taking people who weren't funny and making them funny. He wouldn't mind me saying so. He wasn't always the best impressionist, but what he was brilliant at was finding a comedy element. I suspect you may well be too young to remember. There was a rugby league commentator called Eddie Waring, who people heard every Saturday afternoon on Grandstand on the BBC, and nobody had impersonated commentators up until Mike Yarwood. And you had this very obscure rugby league commentator, but people that sort of knew who he was. And Mike Yarwood took him. You probably won't recognize the voice, but it was a brilliant impression because it didn't sound anything like him. But he talked like that, and everybody recognized the peculiarity of their voice. And he also presented It's a Knockout as well. But it was one of those things, he took somebody who wasn't funny, like Patrick Moore, watch out, I've got behind you. Now let's have a look at Uranus, because Uranus is a fascinating planet in the sky. And what Mike could do was, so that's what I was trying to do with I didn't always succeed. Harry Enfield was better at it than I was, but not create a great impression, but make it funny, and have an element of truth in it. But my favorite was on the second series. John came up to me and said, "Look, what new voices have you got?" And a producer I'd worked with at the BBC told me that he said, "Why didn't you ever go at doing Beryl Reid?" And it never occurred to me to do Beryl Reid. And so I thought, I'll have a think about that. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with it, but I'll have a go. He said, I'm offering it as a challenge. It's called Paul Ciani, and I met him in Montreux, and he was Paul Daniels' producer. Anyway, he said, it's a challenge for you. So I said, I like a challenge. I'll take it up. So I said to John Lloyd, I said, I've been working on Beryl Reid. And he said, what's the point of that? I'm sorry, Steve, but, she's 80, and, we are not going to make a puppet of Beryl Reid. I said, no, I don't think you should. But I do think that this voice would be very good for the Queen Mum, you see, because she had a character called Maureen. And I thought that the same age would do this voice for the Queen Mum because we don't know how she sounds. And he just felt that was brilliant. And again, as soon as we put the voice to the puppet and they created a little sketch, it just worked. And that's sort of how the Queen Mother came about. But by somebody, it's all those flukes and accidents of life that make it, make life so interesting, really.
Just amazing. Did you puppeteer?
I puppeteered as well, because that's why it all went wrong the first two or three shows, because what they decided that what they wanted, so they took me and Chris Barry of Red Dwarf and God knows what else, they trained us to be puppeteers. Actually, Chris Barry was a very good puppeteer because they wanted to do it live because Muppets had always been done live. But then it turned out that it was almost impossible to operate a puppet and do it at the same time. So me and Chris used to stand by on set doing Reagan or Thatcher, or I did David Attenborough. I mean, those are people who do David Attenborough now, but not many people did David Attenborough in those days. So I did him and the others as well. But then we couldn't make the program because we had to close the set while there was sound. So then we decided to pre-record all the voices. But originally, myself and Chris were both trained to be puppeteers. And when Thatcher came to an end, it was a godsend because I had a trade. I had a craft. And there's about 20 puppeteers in the country ever. It's a very, very small number. So after Mrs. Thatcher and the Spitting Image came to an end, I sort of wrote to TV people and I said, look, I can do puppets and I can do voices. So I spent about 7 years. People I think felt sorry for me because, when Spitting Image came to an end, that seemed bad for my bank balance. Obviously, Mrs. Thatcher was bad for my bank balance when she resigned. But that wasn't the way it happened because I joined a television series called Cat's Eyes, BBC schools program, where I played a cat called Jimmy. I didn't tell you how much money I made from that because there were 40 shows. We made 40 shows. There were 15 minutes each. Roland Rivron is in all of them. So I won't go into the details of the plot. But basically, then we made 40 shows that were then shown 4 or 5 times a year for the next 8 years. And sometimes we're shown through the night. 8 shows were shown through the night. So Roland said, I came home pissed one night from the Groucho, switched the television on, and there's 8 episodes of Cat's Eyes going out. I said, well, don't worry, Roland, because you're getting paid for every single one of them. And I genuinely, I made a lot of money from that. But I decided in an odd way that because I had this money come in, it wasn't 100,000, that, but it was enough to pay the bills and the mortgage. So then I thought, okay, I'll use this time to do some teaching, which I've always wanted to do because I had an income coming in. So I went off to the university in Birmingham and did a stand-up comedy course, which I ran. I did some other courses as well. My most famous student is a man called Matt Good, who is now in Downton Abbey. He was in The Watchmen, and he's a very well-known actor now, Matt Good. He was great. And other students have gone on to become casting directors, which is always useful.
That's incredible.
So that was hugely, enjoyable time. I got paid fuck all for teaching. I was getting paid fuck a lot for being a repeated cat, for something I'd done years ago. And the weird thing about being the cat, now there's a generation. I did a workshop with some people in their early 20s for a film. I was sort of casting a film for a friend of mine. And they knew I was an actor, this group, in their early 20s. And they said, what have you been in? I said, well, I don't really do that much, not really on television much now, but I was in a show years ago called Cat's Eyes. And they just went completely silent because that was the show that they watched every single day. They said, that is the show we watched at home when we were ill because they used to put 4 on together. And I said, I was Jimmy, and I did a very dodgy Liverpool accent. And they would come. They didn't know about Thatcher. They were too young to know about Thatcher and Spitting Image. But when they knew that I was Jimmy the cat, they just went crazy. They thought that was the greatest thing in the world. So that was fun. Was that to be recognised for something that wasn't anything to do with Thatcher. And also the great thing with I worked for Muppets as well. I didn't do much for Muppets, but I've got somewhere a little medallion which you get. Muppets are great. I did Dark Crystal recently, which is the Netflix
Oh yeah.
series.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, I got a call one day from literally, on the mobile phone. It's Dark Crystal. Could you come in? I said, yeah, of course. When do you want me to come in? Now? I said, now? He said, yeah. Could you get here within 45 minutes? Yes. Okay. Tell me where the studio is. I got in my car and then I worked on it for several weeks after that. What happened was it was lovely show to work on. And I knew everybody, I knew the whole team. But partly what had happened was they were making Star Wars at the same time. So many of the puppeteers had moved on to Star Wars. So they were shorter puppeteers for crowd scenes. So they had a core team, a very young core team on Dark Crystal. And I went in there and I just essentially operated the eye mechanisms and stuff like that. And I had a really, it was one of those really nice jobs because the director was great and that filtered down to the whole production. And I was working with people I'd known for 20, 30 years. And that was, just nice. And puppeteers, their egos is in their arm. That they don't have egos about themselves. They don't have ego about what they look like. Their ego, is from the top of their shoulders to their wrist. That is where they exist. And that is what they are doing. They're taking something that is inanimate and they're making it live. And that's very few people can do it, actually. I'm not particularly brilliant at it, but the really, really good ones are incredibly rare. And they're just, they've all got their style. That when I can tell who's operating the puppet, even I don't know even I can't see them. I know who's operating it because they've got their individual style. I couldn't tell that with piano players. People say, "Oh, the individual style of a piano player." Who knows? But if I see somebody wiggling a dolly on the television, that's Nigel. I can see that's Nigel's style. That's Simon's style. Oh yeah, am I right? Yeah, it was. Was that Nigel? Yeah, it was Nigel.
I love the fact we've had a puppeteer from the original Dark Crystal, and now someone that did puppets on the remake of Dark Crystal. That's pretty cool.
Who did you have from?
Timothy Rose.
Oh, Tim.
Oh. Yeah, we spoke to
Tim Rose. Yes, Tim. I did a series with Tim. He was a sweet. I did a series I was sacked from called What's Up Doc, which was in the early 90s. And that was a fascinating experience as well because the character I played didn't work. Tim was Baljit on that show, I think, a little sort of furry thing. Tim's lovely. And of course he'd done Star Wars and stuff and worked with Henson's. Anyway, I got fired from this job. And which sounds terrible, but the producer rang me up, Vanessa Hill, and she said, "Steve, you're fired. Do you want to go for lunch on Tuesday?"
What the fuck?
I said, "That would be really nice, thank you." And because it wasn't personal, we both knew I didn't work on the show. The character didn't work. And it wasn't personal. And I said, "I'd love to go." She said, "Well, I want to go to lunch with you because I want to tell you things I can't tell anybody else on the show. Now you're off the show. We can have this discussion."
Phenomenal. That's so cool.
And that's the case. People get fired from jobs for all sorts of reasons. It's not because they're unpleasant or they're difficult to work with. Sometimes you get dropped or fired because it just doesn't work. And you must never, ever take it personally. Just... so we went to lunch, and she's been a good friend ever since. So that's one thing I don't really pass on advice to young students and stuff, but it's not personal when it doesn't work. It rarely is, and so don't turn it into something personal. And I quote that example: "You're fired. Do you want to go out to lunch?"
That's so good.
So just quickly, briefly on Spitting Image again. Obviously, the show was huge. It had massive cultural impact. I mean, like a ton of awards. Went for 18 seasons, and even a number one song in the UK charts. A song that gets stuck in my head the instant I hear it. Chicken in the yes, it's going to be stuck in my head again.
Single, I think, somewhere.
What do you think it was that made that show so loved and special and gave it such longevity?
I think that we have a great tradition of not liking politicians, and we also have a great tradition of Punch and Judy, which I think is going out now because it's Punch and Judy is not politically correct, but kids love it, and even in the modern world, if you didn't have a load of woke parents and woke kids and you just sat them in front of Punch and Judy and did the old Punch and Judy with the sausages and with the baby, that's the way to do it, that's the way to do it, I still think the kids would love it, even though we're not supposed to love it. And I think that combination of not liking politicians and hitting them very hard, and there's something called deadpan as well. The thing about puppets, we could talk about for hours, I know, but the phrase deadpan, which means dead face, pan meaning face, really comes from Buster Keaton. And Buster Keaton, before he went into films, was a vaudeville act with his father. And one of the things that happened with Buster Keaton was he was, when he was a boy, he was sort of sent through the audience on when people pass somebody, what they call it, they pass somebody through the audience on their hands, and they pass them along. It's a way.
Crowd surfing.
Say again?
Like crowd surfing.
Yeah, that's exactly, it's crowd surfing. So he was doing this crowd surfing act, and he was showing pain. And his father said, no, you mustn't show pain, because they won't laugh if you show pain. Because that's, with comedy, you mustn't show emotion. That's comedy must. So learn not to show pain, and that is how he developed the deadpan face, and that's where it comes from. And deadpan comedy, many comedians have deadpan, like Jack D, famous deadpan comic.
Oh yes,
and very good at it. Ironically, he was always a rather cheerful comic when he started. Didn't work out. He went deadpan. Same happened with Les Dawson. They started out being cheeky chappies and did the opposite, and then it worked. The point is, though, the puppets have a dead face, so when you hit them, they never show pain, and that's funny. That's what makes that's what makes puppets brilliant. When you hit them, then they're not showing pain. And it, I was reading, so I love reading comic theory, and somebody was talking about clowns the other day, and the thing about clowns, a pie in the face, custard pie in the face, in itself isn't funny. Knowing the custard pie is about to come into the face, that's funny. Shall I? Shall I? Shall I, boys and girls? That is when the kids scream the loudest. And it's also what John Cleese said about Basil Fawlty acting crazy. Basil Fawlty acting crazy is not funny. Somebody watching Basil Fawlty with a deadpan face, like Sybil, acting funny, that is what's funny. And so eventually we got to work with directors who understood all these things. This is how you direct comedy. This is how it's the anticipation of the knock, not just the knock itself. And it's the deadpan. I was going to do my Sybil Fawlty there, and I've forgotten how to do it. Have you seen the menu? I think we could just have a little bit of Sybil. Anyway, I remember how to do that.
Fantastic.
Oh yes, indeed. Thank you very much for it. But in the Fawlty Towers, it's absolutely brilliant because she stands there completely dead face, watching it, and that is what makes it fun. But there are fewer people now that know how comedy works in terms of how to direct it. People like John Cleese, John Lloyd on Spitting Image did, possibly less so now. But there are rules. There are ways in which. I was watching a clip earlier on tonight. I shouldn't watch the whole film, but I was watching a clip about Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. And I remember reading that Steven Spielberg had storyboarded the lot. He had storyboarded the whole thing. And when he got Sean Connery and Harrison Ford together, he had to completely redo his storyboard, because he realized how well they worked together side by side. and he just left it on the two shot. Pretty much as if you watch that now, they're nearly always in the same frame, the frame together. And Spielberg realized how funny they were playing off each other, and how you had to have both their faces in the shot at the same time. And the number of times as a puppeteer, we had to say to new directors, keep it on the wide. Stop cutting round to individual faces. Keep it, just let the camera do the fucking work. And us to do the work, just leave it. And of course, directors are sort of trained, they've got to cut, they've got to do this, they've got to do all that sort of stuff. There's that famous Sending the Clowns version where it's just ruined by intercutting. Just leave it on the wide, let the actors do it. And we loved the directors who came in and understood that and just said, leave it on the wide. It's a 45-second gag, don't cut, leave it on the wide. It almost looks as if they're not directing because there's no cutting, but it's understanding how the sketch works. And I was driven crazy sometimes working with directors. Cut, don't do that. Just watch Pink Panther movies. Blake Edwards leaves it on the wide. Always leaves it on the wide. Where there's somebody farts in the lift, it's on the wide. There's no intercutting. You just let the actors do what they do. So I learned a lot, by being. Puppeteers are great because we are semi-directors, because we learn the techniques of directing. Do you want me to motivate the cut? I'll turn to the left and motivate the cut, and you learn and also you're looking at a screen all day long. It's why people like Frank Oz became great directors, because as a puppeteer, you're creating the shot within the screen, and you learn the camera geography of what cuts and what doesn't do. We had the most wonderful director. Sadly, she died on Splitting Image, and we were doing a barn dance song, which she came in with a script, and she spent the entire weekend at storyboarding this song, this barn dance song. And one of the puppeteers called Anthony Asbury went up to her and says, "No," the American guy said, no, we don't want that. She was rather taken back by this, and he said, no, just put the camera there, and we'll dulce-do in and out like they do in a barn dance, and do the line as we come in, and we'll dulce-do, I think the technical phrase, and we'll cross, and just leave it on the wide. And she looked at us, and she got hold of her script, and she said, "I've done all this work." And then tore it up, said, "Your idea is better, we'll go with you."
Wow.
And from then on, we just adored her, because she recognized, as often, you work with directors and you offer a better idea, and they're too worried to let the better idea go, even though, and they want their idea. No, I'm going to stick with mine. She said, "Your idea is better." And I hope that's another thing that, you try to learn in life. Don't lose face by, if there's a better idea, steal it.
Yeah.
And take it. And that she did. And we then always wanted to do our best work for her. And then the opposite, you'd get idiot directors who would come in. And directors are always taught, partly because it makes actors look younger, to shoot slightly from above. So that if you shoot from above, as I'm looking at, you can't really tell, but if you shoot from above, you don't get the double chin. As soon as you shoot below, you get the double chin. About 92. So directors are trained to shoot slightly above from, well, that's great with actors, but not with fucking puppets, because you've got a head underneath operating the thing. But when they shot down, you're seeing our head. Could you move it? No, we can't move our head. because it's our head. It's got to stay there. Will you stop shooting from high down onto a puppet? You can't do that. And so we'd always have, God, here we've got another fucking director who wants to shoot a puppet. They'd learn eventually, but that sometimes they were very resistant to it because that is what they've been trained for. So that whole thing of the camera geography of puppeteering or puppets is completely different to other shows. And as I say, I was chatting with the agent today. I said, so few directors actually know anything about comedy. They've got so little understanding about how comedy works, and it is something that works. You've got different ways of doing stuff, but the rules are not rules, but there's when you do it with the guidelines, you keep it simple. That's the rule with comedy, particularly in television. Just keep it simple.
Do you reckon the way the world is now, though, in sorts of comedy and stuff, that's why things have changed so much?
Well, we've lost. We get comedy of embarrassment now, don't we?
Yeah.
That's the dominant thing, and that was The Office was brilliant, but it's comedy of embarrassment. The Office is also a documentary, and that's another thing that's happened. So you get television that is about television now. Even Mrs. Brown's Boys is very clearly set in a television studio. And then, so nearly everything you get, W1A and all this, it's the documentary style and it's embarrassment comedy. And there's just so much of it.
Yeah.
And I went to the RTS, the Royal Television Society, who were doing an evening on comedy. So I went and they were rather full of themselves, all the people on the podium, and they were talking about the 70s, and she said, well, it wasn't really the golden age. So I stood up and I said, okay, name me one television program going out now on BBC One, ITV, Channel 4, that has a working class family that can be watched at tea time by a working class family. They couldn't do it because everything was cutting edge and edgy. It was, after 10 o'clock. I said, where is your working class program? Such as in the 70s, it would have been on the buses, where a working class family, which is, my background, can sit back and see themselves not being made fun of, not being patronized, not being, but I said, it doesn't exist. Partly because people I worked with, people like Johnny Hamp, who was at Granada, he lived in the area and he produced those shows for the area and he used actors that he knew. That sort of doesn't exist anymore. It's all gone a bit Oxbridgey. And they admitted, they said, look, we are working for, they wouldn't use the word working class, we are looking for blue collar comedy rather. And they acknowledge it just doesn't exist on British television at the moment, and it's missing. It's that thing that's missing. So, neither do we have what you may call the old variety tradition, which is things like "Are You Being Served?" Which is pure innuendo and silliness and dressing up in costumes. That doesn't exist either in terms of comedy. Now there's some very good comedies out there, and it's a different style, and it's very clever and intelligent, but and funny, it's fine. But I sometimes miss the 70s, but it's you probably couldn't get away with Are You Being Served now?
I don't think you could.
Nope.
Which is a great shame because Mr. Humphreys was a great character. And a man came into Grace Brothers the other day. He said, I'm looking for something. I said, I'm looking for something big in Y-fronts. I said, well, aren't we all? And I could. He came in. He said, I want to see the cheapest suit in the shop. I said, you're wearing it. And these are all musical gags. They just, and I have a few musical gags in my act. So the other thing, when I started doing the clubs, back again, the comedy clubs, about 10 or 15 years ago, they hadn't seen these gags. The whole audience didn't know their own gags, but I was able to use them. I thought, they don't know these gags. They're gags, So, people would come on and talk about the fact that they split up with their girlfriend or their boyfriend or whatever they talked about, but they didn't do gags. And I was coming on stage doing gags. I was doing a gag that I did back in the 70s. Leonard Rossiter from Rising Damp. And Miss Jones, I went up to Miss Jones. I said, Miss Jones, I said, will you marry me? She said, Mr. Rigsby, with those words, you remind me of the sea. Oh, I said, Miss Jones, I said, is it because I'm wild, romantic, and restless? She said, no, you make me sick. Well, listen. But you've probably never heard it because, this is... So I was still doing that. I thought, God, I'm doing a gag I did in 1976 and I'm doing it in 2006 and they don't know it, because it's an old musical gag. Some of the gags I wouldn't have, I wouldn't use because you wouldn't be able to get away with it. And I wouldn't want to either. There were certain gags from the 70s that I would be very, very unsound now. But you do them privately and people laugh, but you shouldn't, I don't think. So yes, it's and actually talking about comedy is it doesn't make any difference because when you're actually writing the stuff, it's still hard. There's certain rules which I used to teach. They said the students said we want you to teach us how to be funny. I said I can't do that. Nobody can. I can teach you guidelines and rules, but I can't teach you how to be funny. One rule of comedy, for example, is what is known as a periodic sentence. And the periodic sentence is putting the most important word at the end of the sentence. And that often works in comedy. And if you look at the way gags are shaped, you always have the most important word at the end of the sentence. And if it's a gag, that word would not have been used in the setup. So as soon as you use a word that's in the punchline that's also in the setup, you'll kill the gag. And because it's not a surprise, so the word has got to be a surprise, and it's got to come at the end of the sentence. I can't really give you that much of an example, but I can't off the top of my head think of one. But but pretty much any joke, the punchline, you will not find the. If I'd have done the Rigsby routine, which I just did, and said I was feeling very sick the other day, and I went to see Miss Jones. I said, "Will you marry me?" And then do that whole routine. No, Monsieur, no, but you make me sick.
Yeah, it doesn't have the same effect.
Yeah.
It's lost because you've heard the word, and sometimes I've been in a situation where I've accidentally used even a sound-alike word, and then I've made it longer so that people have forgotten I've said the word. Yeah. Or changed the word in my head. It's what Ken Dodd used to talk about comedy. It's a cogs, like the cog of a watch. It's a mechanism. And the person who knows this, oddly enough, and is very different sort of comedian to Ken Dodd, is Jimmy Carr. And Jimmy Carr basically says he spends a year writing 200 jokes. And each joke has got the fewest words possible in it to make it work. It had, and you know that if you've got too many words, the joke won't work. And he hones it down to find the perfect and most economical way of telling the gag. And this is the same actually with any script, because the number of times I've directed plays and stuff where I was in the play actually where I was playing the Irish guy, and it was impossible to learn. There was too many words. It was a new play, and I said to the writer, "There's too many words in your play for me to say." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, look, take this scene." I said, "You don't need that word, you don't need that phrase, you don't know. Can I cut them?" He said, "Well, okay, see how it goes." And it worked much better. And he said, I wish I'd have done that with the whole play. because you saw when you see the actor on stage doing it, you don't need the words.
Yeah.
Just cut them. And that's what that's why Jimmy Carr's gags, they're very gaggy, but they are very brilliantly constructed gags because they are so economical. And the number of times I've seen comics come on stage and there's just too many words in the gag to make it work. Just cut it out. And the sketches we used to get in on Spitting Image were the same. John Lloyd used to have a pencil, which I gave him actually, but he used to have a pencil, and he would spend most of his time crossing out words on the script that was just slightly too verbose, because you just naturally do that when you're writing. So in my own writing, when I look back at it 2 months later, I just cut it down to the absolute minimum. And then if you get somebody to read it out and they're finding it difficult to read, it's because there's too many words. And then you find, a better way of expressing it. And if it's too difficult to speak, it's too difficult for somebody to read. So that's why it's always, if you're writing a book, it's always useful to read it aloud, because we sort of read quietly to ourselves, but we semi-do it in our heads. So it's semi-aloud. And if you can't speak it, you won't be able to read it. And this is all craft, and being able to know the rules doesn't necessarily mean that you're able to do it for real when you're working at it. Very few. John Lloyd and John Cleese rather used to say the only person who could come up with a perfect script first time was Peter Cook. And he said his writing partner was Graham Chapman, and they would spend days in a room trying to get the script right, knowing what we're talking about now, that it's got to be perfect, the words are got, and Peter Cook would just make it up and it would be perfect. He was one of the few people who, he was a bit of a genius, was Peter Cook. I didn't know him well, but he was a lovely man. He was very supportive. Actually, I worked with him a couple of times, and he was very supportive of what I was doing. So I was rather thrilled about that. Anyway. So this was going to be half an hour, wasn't it? And 2 hours later.
I was gonna say, I've just realised we've been going for 2 hours and we've barely scratched the surface of your career.
You'll have to do this. Well, let's do it again.
Yes.
Let's
I was literally just about to say, could we invite you on again in the future and do part 2?
We'll do part 2. Yes, part 2 would be because I can't really talk about the book until it's sort of out there, but once it's out there, I can talk about it a bit.
I was going to say, and we didn't even get to touch on like the live stuff with Maggie when you dressed up as her, anything. We didn't barely scratch the surface.
We've got Mrs. Thatcher in a little bit. She's there, goodness. I think there's things I wish I'd talked about but didn't. But I probably spent too much time talking about time travel. But
honestly, Steve, it's all good. But we will definitely have to do this again, because I've written 3 pages. I think I asked you 3 questions.
Yeah, same. I wrote 3 pages. I think I've got through 1 and a bit, and I think I crossed half of those out because they were covered anyway. So definitely need to do this again. Tom, before we wrap this up, have you got anything else you wanted to ask now?
I'm going to save everything for the next time round, if I'm honest.
And I've now remembered the name of that time thing, if I got it wrong. Timeless, not...
Oh, timeless, yes.
Timeless. And that's funny, that's a funny thing. So if I was talking earlier about Travelers, which is equally brilliant, but Timeless is the sort of time tunnel thing. And I love what I liked about Timeless was when they went in the past and they took on the names of cultural things. So when the 2 women went back to the 80s, they were called Cagney and Lacey. And
nice.
When one of the guys went back to Hollywood in the 40s, he called himself Rhett Butler from Gone with the Wind, or Wesley Snipes or whatever. And yes, there was when one of them called himself Agent Mulder in the 1960s.
Brilliant.
So I loved this anyway. But it was Timeless, not Travelers, if I've made that mistake. So let's talk some more. And I'll send you the time. I'll send you a copy if you want. When it's ready.
Please do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Please do.
And it's a free book. It's going to be out there on the internet eventually, so people are welcome to look at it, and no charge and things like that. So It's my goodwill gesture to mankind.
Well, speaking of the internet, Steve, where can people find you on the old world web?
Well, I'm on the worldwide. I'm on Twitter at steve@nallon.com. And I've got my website, which is www.nallon.com. And that will also take you to the other stuff, including the book, which I won't reveal now, but we'll talk about that some other time. But it is out there already, but it will need to be found. So yeah, and I've got archive pages and spitting image stuff. There's nothing massively special about it, just and also my personal history's out there, and because I had a difficult time when I was a kid, but I put that out there for various reasons. So yeah, nallon.com if people are interested. But this has been a complete joy. I so rarely do this. And, I don't see many people. I don't get out much. So this has been a great conversation. So
I would have happily sat here chatting for hours, but I think for our listeners, we better cut this and go and do another part another time.
I've got to visit Hattie now. I've got to use the lure.
Same, to be honest. You've probably seen me sat here fidgeting. But
no, mate. Yes.
Steve, thank you so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you again soon, sir.
Hello. Thanks very much. Ta-ra.
Take care now.
Cheers.
Bye.